Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought it could have been worse, but it wasn't, thankfully? Thankfully, it didn't. The images in your mind of you or me, man, this situation could have been worse, but it didn't. When I was 13, my mom and I almost got kidnapped. And yeah, we almost did. And this was during the time where flip phones and Nokia phones were around, right? So I just gave away my age, but that's besides the point. But and on top of that, this was also a time where my grandpa passed away. So there was a lot of things and a lot of emotions that were going on during this time because we took the first flight out to the Philippines, and this is how we got the information. It wasn't through our phone, like how the information nowadays, where you could just literally Google it and it'll pop up on real time, right? So we went to the Philippines, and right out the gate, we find out that the region that my grandpa was going to get buried in was actually on a high alert status or a red flag status, meaning that they highly encourage travelers not to go into this region because during this time, Muslim extremists were threatening to overthrow the government, the local government, and threatened anybody that was not from this region, which the region was called Mindanao. They would threaten them, and they would threaten to kidnap them, right? So we had that. They would threaten to kidnap them, and they would hold them for ransom. But during this time, like, my grandpa just passed away. That's my mom's dad, and so of course we were gonna go anyway. We needed to see my grandpa. We needed to bury him. So we ended up taking the first flight out to Mindanao. And so when we got to Mindanao, you could already feel the tension. Because when we went down when we went on the plane, on the runway, you could see American troops, which gave you a little bit of a sense of safety. But of course, I was only in the confines of the airport. So we ended up going through the airport, baggage checks the airport. U.S. troops were the ones who were checking our bags. So we ended up going to the house, and my grandpa's house, and then later that evening we had the viewing service, and then the following morning we took a break to kind of gather ourselves because there was a lot going on the night before, the day before. So, and later that afternoon we went to go visit my grandpa's wife. My grandpa's wife was actually sick, so we weren't able to see her the first night. And so this is where my life turned around, flipped upside down, or that one phrase that we always hear: my life flashed before my eyes. This is one of them moments, right? So when we got out of the hospital, we noticed something that was just so out of the ordinary. It was suspicious. It was weird. So when we got out of the hospital, we noticed guns on the floor. Yeah, guns. And these weren't just regular old guns. These looked like illegal guns. They were on the floor. And then we went out of the hospital, and my uncles, who were escorting us at the time, looked out at the guns, and they turned to me and they told me, "Gene, take your shoes off right now." I was like, why do I have to take my shoes off? What is going on? So take your shoes off now, give them to your uncle, switch shoes with him. I was like, okay, I will do that. Because it was clear that it didn't look like I was from there, right? I was wearing Jordans, I had basketball shorts, I had my shirt tucked in, right? It looked like I was coaching, right? So we switched my shoes, and they put this coat over me, and they said, "Don't look anywhere else, look down, don't look at anybody, just keep walking." And this is where it got even more intense, because the van that was parked at a designated area where you can't actually park was not there anymore. So when we were talking to the guard said we had to tell him to move because he couldn't park there. It was like, but it's a designated area. So my uncle didn't want to argue anymore, and we just wanted to get out of there as soon as we can. So we ended up taking this thing called a chop chop. A chop chop is a motorcycle, right? It's a motorcycle, but you can transport 5 other people on there. So we ended up getting on there, and so we were we were on the motorcycle, then all of a sudden, luckily it was in a bit busy landmark in a busy intersection, so if anything happened to us, people would notice for sure. So we ended up going on this transportation for about 2 minutes, and all of a sudden my uncle says, "Stop, just stop, we need to get out. I think someone is following us." And me looking down, I couldn't. I was just so, I was tensed, and I was so terrified. So I just followed him. My uncles and my aunts and my mom were right beside me, so they made this circle around us, and we were just swiftly and quickly as we can, we were trying to go to the van, and luckily it wasn't that far, so we ended up going into the van. And we were driving for about an hour and a half. It was already nightfall. We just wanted to make sure that nobody was following us. And all of a sudden, we go off into this dirt road. And we were driving for about a good 15 to 20 minutes. And all of a sudden, we go underground and into this safe house. It was just like living a movie. It was so terrifying. It was intense. And then we stayed in this safe house for about 3 hours. And I was sweating. I was trembling. And all of a sudden, there was a loud knock on the door. It was about and when the door opened, it was like cavalry came. Right, there was like 5 white vans outside. I think it was the local police. I was hoping it was the local police and the local military, but we ended up going inside the van. And then I've never seen so much guns in my life. But most importantly, we got escorted back to safety. And the following morning, we had my grandpa's funeral, and that following afternoon or that following evening, we ended up taking the first flight back home. And so that was the most terrifying story in my life. But I was thinking about the story, and it's easy to pinpoint the times where we absolutely need God to intervene, right? Where we absolutely need God, where we're crying out for God. But the matter of fact is, and it's hard, right? But the matter is, we ought to include him in every single aspect of our life. The big things and the small things, right? But we all know, if you're like me, it's difficult to do that, right? And the psalm that we're going to read today, it's Psalms 124. And Psalms 124 is written by the psalmist David. And scholars in the Bible commentaries that I've come across believe that this was written by David because they were in a very vulnerable state, because David was the king, but then their kingdom, Israel, was very small, and they were just starting, and there's other established kingdoms that were threatening to overthrow their government, overthrow their kingdom. And I'm reminded in Psalms 124 is that maybe sometimes we just lack the confidence of what God has done in our life, right? If you read through the Israelites, they constantly forgot what God has done in their life. And similarly to our lives, especially in the last 2 years of this pandemic, we want to take control of every single aspect of our life. I know I do. And trusting God with every single thing, I don't know if that's even possible. Does God even know what's going on right now in our society, in our culture, in our world? God, do you know that there's a global pandemic? And you want us to trust you with everything? And Psalms 124 reminds me that sometimes maybe, just maybe, that we just lack the confidence in what God has done, or we forget what God has done in our life. And so if there's anything to remember today, or wherever you're watching this, day, night, during the morning, right, is that remembering breeds confidence. Remembering breeds confidence. And how does remembering breed confidence? Well, remembering breeds confidence by affirming the difference that God has made in your life. Remembering breeds confidence by giving praise and thanksgiving for what God has done in our life. And remembering breeds confidence by telling others what God has done in your life. And we're going to read Psalms 124, and it says this. It says, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side." Let Israel now say, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when our enemies attacked us, then they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away, then the torrent would have gone over us, then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who have made heavens and earth. And the psalm is broken up into 3 portions. And the first portion we're going to look at this is remembering breeds confidence by affirming the difference that God has made in your life. And I want you to notice this, right? In the first 2 verses, it says, if the Lord had not been on our side. And now he brings in Israel. Another translation says, sing with me now, because this is a hymn. He says, sing with me now, Israel, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side. And I want you to concentrate on these 2 little letters, I and F. This one little word, if. If is such a small word, but it has big implications. And what are those implications? So David, the psalmist, was essentially trying to help Israel and remind them and encourage them and say, yo, look, remember this day. I want you to remember this day. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, we would have been, and he went into this to this overextension of imagination of what could have happened. Because he wanted to make emphasis, look, we would have been swallowed up in life. So he started to use this animal metaphor of imagine being swallowed up by an animal. Yeah, we would have been swallowed up by the enemy. And he goes on to this other metaphor, when their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. Now, he wasn't talking about any type of flood where it slowly comes and just kills you. No, this is a flood that will swipe us away. The torrent would have gone over us, then over us would have gone the raging waters. I didn't know the raging waters existed back in the day too. But he was encouraging the Israelites. He was reminding them to remember this day and to affirm the difference that God has made in their life. And I imagine the Israelites were just like, well, what difference did it make if God was with us or not? It made all the difference because it saved their kingdom. They would have been swiped away. And I couldn't help but ask this question. Where would I be without God? Where would I be without the awareness of this divine being in my life? Where would you be without noticing this divine being, this creator of the universe and the heavens and the earth? Where would I be? And when you ask those questions, those reflection questions, it's remembering. And when you remember those things that God has done in your life, it ought to give you confidence. So remembering breeds confidence by affirming the difference that God has made in your life. And secondly is remembering breeds confidence by giving praise and thanksgiving to God. It says in verses 6 and 7, says, blessed be the Lord who has not given us prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. The psalmist is now remembering that we have escaped. And he uses the word escape twice here, and he uses the word snare twice here. Because he's remembering, and even in verse 6, right? He sets it off, this first portion. He's essentially, the psalmist is moving us from what could have happened to what actually happened. And what actually happened is God saved their butts. God protected them. God delivered them. God came at the right time, at the right moment, and they were not swept away. They weren't obliterated by the enemy. They weren't destroyed by the enemy. So this event, this thing that happened that saved their butts, compelled David, where he just could not fathom what happened, to bringing him to praise and thanksgiving. It says in verse 6, blessed be the Lord. And another translation says, praise be to God. How many times that we have in those moments in our life? It's like, oh my gosh, thank you, God, for protecting me. Thank you, God, for providing for me. Thank you, God, for giving me the wisdom and the guidance to not get into that relationship. It would have been horrible for both of us, or that job, whatever it may be. And he goes on to say that we have escaped like a bird. And if you notice how a bird escapes, it's very swift, it's very fast. And I can assume that the bird was not injured, so they weren't injured, they weren't damaged. And a snare is a trap. A snare is a trap. So essentially, he was saying that we thought we were trapped, but we weren't. Praise be to God. Blessed be the Lord. How many times has God in our life, when we remember, has helped us escape swiftly without injury? Or help us escape, and there might be some injuries, but it could have been worse. And when I think about my life and the things that he has delivered me from, I cannot help but remember and give thanks and praise to God for what he's done in my life. So remembering breeds confidence by giving praise and thanksgiving to God. And lastly is this, and this is I'm done after this. So we have remembering breeds confidence by affirming the difference that God has made. Remembering breeds confidence by giving praise and thanksgiving to God. And then remembering breeds confidence by telling others what God has done in your life. It says in verses 8, it says, our help is in the name of the Lord who has made heaven and earth. I felt like when he was saying this this sentence, he was taking just a deep sigh of relief. Like, I'm so glad this is over. Our help is in the name of the Lord. So I want you to notice this portion here that the psalmist essentially is moving from affirming to praising to now testifying. Our help is in the name of the Lord. I can imagine that people were just kind of questioning what was going on. It's like, how are they still here? How are they still alive? How are they still standing? I thought they were going to die. That kingdom, yeah, they weren't going to last. How are they alive? It felt like the psalmist was just like, well, yeah, we didn't do that for sure. We couldn't survive that. But, our help was in the name of the Lord. Our help came from God. And I like how he ends this psalmist because he says, the one who made heaven and earth. So he's essentially telling, the God that made heaven and earth. The God that made the universe, the kingdoms. That God? Yeah, he was the one who protected us. And what more? The God of the universe, the God who created the heavens and earth. What more? His most precious creation, which is you and I. What more where he would want you to lean on him for protection, for guidance, for deliverance, for wisdom? What more he would want you to be protected? What more our loving Father, our loving God would want to come protect you? And I think about this verse is because remembering breeds confidence and telling others. Remembering breeds confidence is not just to give us confidence when we remember, but remembering also breeds confidence for other people around us. There are countless stories in our life, in my life, where when you're just talking over the dinner table, when you're just speaking about your week, or when you're just remembering, like, wow, I can't believe that I went through that, but I'm still here. How many of those stories can give confidence or breed confidence in others? That it's not just for us. Our stories are not just for us to continue to give us hope, which is good, which is needed, because we all know we need it in these last 2 years of being in a pandemic. That we need to remember that if God can come through for people in the scriptures, he will definitely come through for us. But remembering breeds confidence not just for us, but it also helps breed confidence for others who need it the most. So remembering breeds confidence by affirming the difference that God has made in your life. Remembering breeds confidence by giving praise and thanksgiving to God. And lastly, remembering breeds confidence by telling others what God has made in your life.